As much as genre discourse in gaming is tiring, we do tend to orbit around the idea that JRPGs are among our favorite genre, even if defining them can be a nightmare. We tend to think of it like anime and that you don't need the game to come from Japan to qualify. It just needs to follow enough established patterns of the genre, or is obviously descended from a work that is generally undisputably a JRPG. As opposed to anime, though, I think there is less pushback with classifying games as JRPGs, even if their dev team is not Japanese. Maybe it's just where we reside on the internet, but we don't run into arguments about it very much. Nonetheless, if you like typically linear, typically turn-based RPGs with a focus on characters and story, and a word count rivaling a book, and maybe a fuck ton of zippers, you have a lot to be excited about. Well, that is, if you know where to look. After just leaving a year in which two beloved JRPG franchises got new, shiny AAA installments that were regarded as mid at best, and the most popular casual JRPG of all time having its fastest selling installment be as buggy as Cyberpunk 2077 at launch, it'd be easy to lose hope in getting anything good anytime soon. However, this is just the type of pressure cooker that creates good independent art. We're in a JRPG renaissance right now. At least for indies. And mark my words, 2023 will be the year of the JRPG. And I don't just say that because recently released and upcoming titles in the genre are kicking ass, or just because our recent or because our recent exploration of genre classics is shaping up to have matched their historical hype. But because among new and upcoming JRPGs, there are a lot of experimentation being done and sleeper classics that we only just got hip to that has been blowing our mind in profound ways. Typically, only one or two of us are interested in a game in a given genre at a time, but right now, nearly all of us who exist publicly have a JRPG on their personal hype list. Our special interest is indie games, so we tend to have the problem of too many promising games to sift through, or not enough time to actually play them all the way through. And that's made it difficult to make videos about the things we're excited about, because even the length of this video is well beyond the length that we intended, and this is just scratching the surface of any of the games we mentioned. And it just got out of hand really quickly. This was supposed to be a really short video, and it's probably over an hour long now. But in an attempt to remind you all that we're still alive, and to inspire those among you who may desire to craft an interesting JRPG in your lifetime, we present 6 JRPGs to restore your faith in the medium. Phantom's Revenge by Bensane is an RPG that's simple, to the point, and a very quick game. If the scope was different, you might expect it to be a demo to a bigger project, but actually, it's part of a transmedia storytelling. Not to be confused with the gender kind of trans. Transmedia storytelling is when you tell a story across several different mediums, like the Matrix franchise tried to do with the Enter the Matrix and Matrix Online games. Basically, it's something in which you can't get the whole story by only consuming a single medium of its content. I mean, Avatar Korra does have a bunch of comics that happen after the end of the series. You could count that as well. A lot of times, though, it's small, like a prologue tie-in comic for a super lesbian animal RPG. Something to get your whistle wet. Phantom's Revenge is actually the finale of the story told in the webcomic Slime and Punishment, which is a dark comedic MLP fan comic. Not something I'd usually happen upon, cause we're only just tangentially in that community, not to mention embarrassment of engaging with something as edgy as Phantom's Revenge. But even with no knowledge of the story up to this point, I'm still inclined to tip my hat to it. The game depicts Phantom gunning for revenge of the big bad of the series who apparently killed his friends with acid rain? Sorry, biocarbonate soda water, which is deadly to slime-based creatures. Which apparently Phantom is because the most dangerous mobs in this game are Sonic Chews? Sonic Chews? With super soakers filled with biocarbonate soda water. Oh, did I mention the Sonic Chews yet? Yeah, I feel like that's the element of this game and its comic that will cause people to distance themselves from it the most, and like, you know, write it off. All the enemies aside from the 2 boss encounters are Sonic Chews. Sonic Chew is a meme with a lot of dark shit associated with it, but I won't derail to tell you about it. I'm pretty sure you can look that up on your own. Chances are, you might know more than me. It wasn't a big part of our internet experience. Like all the games on this list, we don't think this is simply a neat game to play, but rather an inspiring one, especially mechanically. We hesitate to call ourselves aspiring game devs, but we do want to make games at some point, and with games like this that exemplify how far you can push assets, especially when you use other tools effectively, it's kind of awesome. Enemies are mostly recolors of the same sprite, and kind of like Skullgirl color palettes or references to other media. Some are jokes and memes, and apparently some are even PonyTuber references. It's quite tongue-in-cheek. Something so obviously a shortcut being utilized for comedy is a great example of using your limitations to your advantage. Many indie game devs struggle with art assets, and that's why asset packs are so voluminous, whether it be RPG tileset or backgrounds and sprites for visual novels. So to get something unique made can be expensive, especially if you want a character to have a lot of expressions. Under the assumption that most characters from the comic are already dead and Phantom is making a last-ditch effort, it makes sense that there's no other party members or friendly NPCs. Well, I guess your phone counts? And of course, Virginia! The game is basically one long hallway where you slice up Sonic chews like cheap deli meat. It has the soul of a hack and slash and the frame of an RPG, and I am here for it. The entire game is kind of a long battle screen. The usual combat menu has a bunch of commands, from dabbing to using your turn to check your surroundings, or the composition of the enemy group a screen ahead so you can prepare. This game rewards you for planning and meticulous play, and just experimenting with the different commands you have. Some of them are jokes, some of them are very necessary. One thing that this being the end of an established story does for the game is hyping up the stakes that if it were the start of a story wouldn't feel right. This feels like you just loaded up someone's save from right before the final dungeon. The damage numbers are huge and every hit you do is a kill. You are seemingly over-leveled. Almost a third of the enemies can't hurt you at all, and another third does shit damage. But the challenge doesn't come from any individual enemy, but the mob as a whole, and how you navigate resources to deal with them, cause you're gonna have to take hits at some point. You can get overwhelmed and die super easily as your opponents are armed to the teeth with weapons meant to kill you. You must use your resources wisely. There is no AoEs, and there will be times when you have to tank hits. In a sick RPG twist, your health pool, your slime, is also used when you attack. Not only that, but you have a hunger stat to keep down. If it gets to 100, you cannot attack, and that will be a problem, now wouldn't it? I got soft locked a few times. So you might even find yourself with a ton of slime, and then immediately lose a bunch. You start with a set amount of recovery items and your trusty partner Virginia, and that's pretty much it. Once you recognize that you have an extra party member, it might seem easy peasy, since Virginia kills in one hit too, but you'll find that using Virginia optimally is the only way to actually beat this thing, because you can easily get soft locked from getting too hungry and not having any fuck energy drinks to bring it down. The power fantasy of cutting down countless weaklings is subverted by the game's unforgiving difficulty, and it's little narratively resonant to boot. You're strong, but you are a lone warrior in Virginia on a suicide mission. To survive, you have to pull out all the stops. It's a precision platformer kind of tightness with its design. You have to really think about what you're doing, and I think it's near impossible to beat it your first time without a guide. And that's to say nothing of how meticulous you have to be with resources to get the true ending, on top of just beating it like I did. And I still didn't do it after 6 runs! Even with how much trial and error is involved and how much a guide or let's play might be what you need to look up to actually finish the game, the natural discovery of elements that oftentimes don't have any real impact on your ability to finish the game are a treat and a half, and you'll want to experience them firsthand. Like the stock trading you can do on your phone. Which do you want more, KFC or Pizza Hut? Although the comedic elements are pretty strong in this one, I think that narratively it's quite strong. Even without knowledge of the rest of the story, the emotional beats of this game are clear, although it does dip into camp. And I don't bat an eye at calling it a JRPG. Also the fact that I found it by searching JRPGs on itch.io. It's because there's a strong sense of character and story here, much in the tradition of other games in the genre. At the end of the day, the minimalism of Phantom's Revenge shows a lot of creativity in how it's used. but it's a bleeding edge of style. It's reminiscent of something you'd expect to have nostalgia from in the furry community from the early aughts, and to me it was a reminder of why stuff like Sparkle Dog and stick figure fighting animations are so cool, cause this combines elements of both, and enough blood to make Tarantino blush. And if you have any aspirations as a content creator in 2023, you should be taking notes, cause the game's developer Ben Saint was busy last year. He released this game to finish off his webcomics that's been going on since 2019, and an 8-hour video lecture on the lore of the entire Mega Man mythos. This guy is putting in good work. As much as we stand in awe of the work of our peers, we know firsthand that the amount of work needed to stay consistent and the tenacity to make sure one is fed through that work is exhausting. Artists are not. We try to be careful when giving encouragement because we'd hate to encourage workaholism, especially because we sometimes suffer from it ourselves. I hate what grind culture did to us. A lot of folks find meaning and fulfillment with work, but for most, even an important job can become little more than a paycheck and a headache. Games set in future dystopias are a dime a dozen, especially in the JRPG space. As leftists, we're excited to see themes of work abuse and the oppression of workers in a video game, especially as political themes in the JRPG genre tend to be undercut by a story defaulting to kill a god at the end of the game. And we often see that as undercutting it because it seems that no matter what was happening in the story, systematic oppression in the plot is just quelled by killing one person or one entity. So when I found out the premise of Dystopia Post-Human RPG was that the big bad was your boss and you seek to escape your dangerous and toxic bounty hunting gig economy job, I was on the floor. It's sometimes embarrassing to admit, but we often find ourselves passing up on perfectly good games that we are sure we will love on paper, but don't have an artistic style that appeals to us. It feels vain. At the same time though, we kind of pride ourselves on having good taste on aesthetics. To a degree, everyone has a tendency to gravitate towards things that they find visually appealing. Setting yourself apart with a bold style can be a challenge though. Like we saw with Phantom's Revenge, there can be limitations in unique sprite animations for attacks or expressions. For a short game with a laser focus, that's fine. But for a party-based RPG with a clear focus on style as well as gameplay, you kinda want more meat on the bones. JRPGs can be static visually, and still be good of course, but a deep sense of style is dripping off the ones that have the strongest weight in your mind, I'd hazard to guess, even if that style is simplistic. This has been an attempt to soften the blow to my ego that even if this game didn't touch on my politics or didn't have just so much very gender about it, that the art style alone would have had me booted up. Of course, as an analyst and a lover of art, I'd like to wax poetic about how much I love the sprite work and how it gives off the vibe of handheld console games like you may have found crouching on the floor of a GameStop in the mid-aughts. Sometimes simply, pretty colors look good, this game is complex and challenging and fascinating, but also, it's just nice to look at. The characters and the animations. Have you ever been playing a game and had that shorter breath anticipation of getting a new attack or spell and immediately getting to a fight just to test it? And then you let it off and you just go, damn! You might just have a few of those moments playing this. At least I did. But hey, I like pretty colors. What people who are hard-won to turn-based RPGs tend to celebrate are ones that have some sort of stimulation beyond the strategy of combat. Active time battle makes your life a chess tournament, and many games make you momentarily remember dexterity is a thing you need. But sometimes the stimulation of seeing cool attacks is important too. I hear you, it looks pretty and it's gender, but how does it play? Dystopia hits on the approach that JRPGs have been leaning into a lot as of late, and it's subtle how it iterates and plays with its typical conventions. Its aspirations don't seem to upset the status quo, but rather bend it to its will. The game has a job system, so everyone has a role that they're designed for. Your primary character, Akira, all pronouns, please give him pats, is a ninja. And as I'm recording this, I can't remember anyone else's class, and I did not write it in this script. Input class is here. You spend points to unlock new moves or update existing ones. The skills themselves are very technical and remind me of movesets found in games like Risk of Rain, complete with cooldowns and descriptions for percentages of damages. You can upgrade the moves that gel with your build and develop your characters in a way that allows some diversity in playstyle while still having a sense of characters being obviously designed to play a certain way. And this game was made with challenge in mind, so it's sped to flex your brain muscles. Dystopia is in a growing list of games that we like that trim some of the needed fat off of tired and true JRPG formulaic tropes. The twist in this battle system I find most noteworthy is how MP works. All your characters only have 4 maximum MP, and they gain 1 every turn. What that means is that you generally never stay mana parched, and MP restorative items aren't your primary means of casting skills consistently. The battle system encourages a dynamic ebb and flow to battle. Attacking and guarding restores MP as well as killing foes with certain skills and achieving a status called Hype. Hype has a similar function to the extra turns you get in Persona games for hitting weaknesses. You get it from pulling off crits, hitting weaknesses, and killing enemies with basic attacks. This MP system pushes you to be bold, yet smart, so you can create and sustain openings. Synergy with your party is paramount to success, and it feels good to try to master. Outside of combat and towns, you traverse 2D platforming style. Maybe that's part of the handheld vibe I mentioned earlier? It leans into a puzzle platforming vibe. Reversing gravity, zip lines, ladders, spikes, and switches are all common elements. The combat system is where the game weight is most heavy in terms of complexity, but platforming is a nice addition to spice things up. Story-wise, I've only played through the prologue, so I can't speak beyond the strong first impression I got 6 months ago, with many builds since then. But if this video posts when I intended to, the Steam release for Dystopia probably comes out today. Actually, it comes out the day that I'm recording this, but not the day I posted it. But that means you can buy it right now if you like. Not sponsored. Support small artists. I'd actually been waiting for the full release to play it, which is why I didn't play any more after that. I'm pretty sure the whole build was up at one point. There were some strong themes bubbling up from the very start that got me invested. Distrust of the state, self-worth, and objectification through work. And despite it being a post-human RPG, one of Dystopia's strongest themes seemed to be what it means to be a person. Being a person and being a human are mutually exclusive here, at least in the narrative that is being challenged. Humans are nearly extinct, and the last brain of one, Akira's boss Zaz, is fighting to resurrect them. It's a noble cause, but it's not long before it's obvious that being a capitalist and possibly a colonizer come way before being a human to him. The foreshadowing of how bad a person he is, and subsequently how much of a villain he is like a glowing neon sign, even if you aren't a leftist. I'm sure Elon Musk would love him. I love the audacity of giving the villain of your JRPG the most on-paper humanitarian goal in the world, and to have your protagonist at least initially motivated by just the humble desire to get the fuck out of this shitty job. Cause I think a story like this speaks to the audacity and absurdity of living right now more than ever. I'm glad that a game like this exists, and that it can exist despite everything else that sucks. Here's hoping it doesn't end with killing God after all. Not to say that killing God is bad, it's just overdone, and saving the world plotlines are exhausting. Something that RPG Maker games, RPG or otherwise, in part have done is widen the scope of themes and framing for an RPG. Nearly every work of art iterates on or replicates elements of what came before. Nothing is completely original, but within well-trodden frameworks, simply breaking conventions feels like something completely new. Chrono Trigger's exclusion of random battles really makes up the formula, and a lot of games since then have followed that inclination, yet still random battles are kind of the bread and butter of the genre. So every time I see a JRPG say that they don't have random battles, I do flappy hands, before remembering several hours later that there's a huge push from devs to players alike who would rather random battles be left in the past. In fact, the modern legally adult gamer is more likely to play a JRPG to completion if it adds some of those common elements that bloat playtime, random battles only being one of them. Citation needed. Farewell Ikion caught our attention mechanically from his proposition of no random battles or traditional leveling, but went further to disregard elements of grinding by having just boss encounters basically. In the 2 hours I spent playing the demo during Steam Next Fest in the summer of 2022, I got in about 3 fights, and the way one fights was the other mechanical wrinkle that attracted me to Ikion. Every character in your party gets their own lane with 5 spots to stand. You can dodge attacks by not standing on spaces your opponent is targeting, though you won't always be lucky enough to be able to dodge all the attacks, cause sometimes the enemy will just target all of them. It feels like a simplified version of Mega Man EXE in some ways. Battle Network for those who watched 4Kids TV. Not just the lanes for battle that resemble a grid once your party gets bigger, but also the visual style. It's like your party is in a video game. I have the feeling that lore will use this visual foreshadowing to its benefit in the story later on, and that gets me to the point of the story of it's kind of a mystery at its core. Maybe psychological mystery? Jack the protagonist seems to be living a pretty typical life as an ice cream stand seller and janitor of a port town that's really touristy. The inciting incident is absurdly mundane. There's no ice cream left and Jack's boss orders a resupply from the town over, but it's supposed to come in a week. And since Jack figures he could just walk there and back in less than a day, then he should just go and come back. Except no one from his town wants him to leave, including his boss that must be surveilling him because he gets calls from payphones wherever he goes. What at first seems like general polite worry for lousy weather becomes something much more incredulous. To the point where Jack has to force himself out of town, which incidentally we're told he's never actually left. What follows challenges his understanding of the world and his reality, and soon returning home becomes much more difficult than he thought, and the journey home, or whatever it was that's left of it, becomes the journey of the game. Unless he eventually kills God. What does a JRPG do when you cut down on the fighting? Spend more time with exploration and puzzles, of course. Even as far from release as this game is, it seems that there is a big focus on world building. Jack isn't a protagonist that is ignorant of the world like many of the grand story narratives that we're used to, using such characters to exposit lore to the audience more naturally, but rather, Jack has an incongruent knowledge of the current world. Something as simple as no one ever having heard of the ice cream that he sells in the town that he comes from the town that his boss apparently orders it from, is just one example of utter susness that could normally be overlooked. Having a setup like this makes it easy to explain things to Jack being framed as holes in his understanding without having his character needing to be a complete outsider of the world that he's in. Best of both worlds. And you can exploit being uncomfortable by him having his worldviews challenged on a fundamental level. Several people in the demo even questioned his sanity. The puzzles I encountered were mostly bots pushing and light platforming, but I'm sure the demo was only the tip of the iceberg. The funny thing about JRPGs is that typically they don't show you all the cards at first, so you can't be sure how the escalation will go or how frequent battles will actually be. But I'm down to see how all these elements synthesize when it releases sometime next year? I should go to the Steam page. To be announced, eventually. But I'm down to see how all these elements synthesize when it releases eventually. Punk talked about knowing how a sense of style in a JRPG is important, and even Fantasia talked about the merits of the rule of cool when talking about a game that many might find the opposite of cool. What is stylish is subjective, but even if something isn't stylish to you, that doesn't mean you won't be able to tell that it's doing what it's doing on purpose and owning it. When we celebrate style, that's what we mean. Style is just an expression of a self, or an idea. This work knows itself. That's what's so enamoring about debatably cringy media. It commits to a sense of self even if it risks losing onlookers. Some of the best art does that. Sometimes normies are alienated. Go figure. Being unashamed about your interests is hard, and being loud about it on top of that when you know what happens to nails that stick out shows tenacity. Heisei Pistol Show is a tenacious JRPG that might just be overdosing on its own sense of style. It's a poster child for the image of a rough around the edges and done by a single person kind of RPG Maker game. It's flamboyant to the point of garishness, and that's kind of part of the charm. To be honest, if you spend any time with it, you might come to appreciate that garishness and how much it commits to its own flamboyancy, because that absurdism is a great juxtaposition to its very, very dark elements. Heisei Pistol Show is a grindhouse JRPG about a gay fashion Lolita hitman. God, my head hurts. As he hunts for the man he loved that betrayed him, and is subsequently hunted by hitmen of the organization he deserted. There's so much gay energy all over this, you need to understand. It certainly invites comparisons to works like No More Heroes or Kill Bill, as it's a assassins killing assassins story, but it's got a very small scope. On the surface, this is a tried and true revenge tale that video games can't get enough of pursuing. Plus it's gay. Although the moral heart of the game is thankfully doing much more than the typical violence is bad and revenge is bad, but isn't this cool? Narrative that is so ubiquitous in stories like this. Although the violence in a game like this is abstracted during combat, as it has a very simple first-person combat view coupled with attack animations that by and large are pretty basic. Although, in an abstract sense, it does get pretty graphic during its cutscenes, as it depicts some very gory realities. Though it is chock full of trigger warnings, so be careful. Lots of suicidal ideation and abuse. But if you can take a Mori, I'm pretty sure you can take this. Many folks will be playing this for the story, not the gameplay per se. And in the story, the game gets chillingly dark, but pragmatically doesn't offer a simple solution for the protagonist to have done to be a better person, or should have done. Hart, our protagonist, is kind of like May from Night in the Woods in that he's a technically unlikable protagonist, though he does have a sense of endearableness. But he's a really fucked up person, but from the vantage point of the player is fairly sympathetic. And of course May wasn't a murderer, though being a murderer isn't generally Hart's problem. HPS is a story about our favorite thing, abuse and unprocessed trauma. I want you to play a game yourself, so I'm trying to keep it spoiler light, but I need to illustrate the weight of the journey in some way, and this feeling of shittiness that the character exudes, despite me actually having some affection for him. This game has no random battles, just like another game we were just talking about, no grinding, just bosses, exploration, and story, and every step within it feels like the final level of The Last of Us, but worse. And gay. Heisei Pistol Show depicts the radical self-harm of destroying all your relationships. Killing your friends is an easy metaphor for cutting ties in this case. The promise of cool assassin boss fights is intentionally undercut by the fact that all of the bosses are your friends and trying to talk sense into you. If you're familiar with a game like, say, Metal Gear Solid, imagine if all of the villain monologues before the fight were them begging you to give up on this self-destructive path, but it just bounces off a heart like water off a duck's back. In the soft canonical order, they even seem to suggest that they'll forgive you for the bosses, i.e. their fellow friends, that you've already murdered. Hart is broken and chasing the easy revenge of running away from why he feels broken, blaming it on someone else, anyone else. I seldom find myself so against the wishes of a character I'm inhabiting for a game, but the more you come to understand why Hart is the way he is, the more the journey feels like a tragedy. But to only highlight the story, I think would be missing a lot to say. It has great imagery and resonant themes, but the exploration is noteworthy too. It's very reminiscent of Yume Nikki style dream exploration games. Many areas are connected nonsensically, and there are areas that are subversions of other ones. There's also a puzzle or two. At first it seems like you don't have to explore the entire world to complete the game, but on your first run you'll probably want to. At least as far as getting all the money goes. There are chests and NPCs who give out money. Again, there's no way to grind, so the only way to buy things is to search around for the money spots. The game even tells you how much money you found out of the total money in the game. It's important because you need the money to buy guns, and it's a pretty clever way to make discovery and wandering a driving force to get players engaged outside of scenes and fights. This game could have easily had the fights connected with, say, just some visual novel style text, but the exploration is actually a very important part of it. Reminds me of how empty a game like Fury was between fights. There are ways to make boss rush scenarios stimulating in a game's downtime, and HPS does it pretty well. Though, I guess I am keeping a pretty high standard, not everything can be Shadow of the Colossus. Not only do you acquire money to fill out your kit through exploring, but also come across hints on how to combat bosses, which will come in handy because they do not go down easy. So that segues into what the battles are actually like. Some RPG Maker games use RPG Maker as a way to tell stories under a framework that defies what someone would naturally assume someone making a game in an application called RPG Maker would want. It's common knowledge now, but many games made in this engine are not RPGs in the typical sense, or not at all. And there are plenty that are just not combat focused. Some folks categorize these kind of games as walking simulators or visual novels with the skin of a JRPG. But there's so much more that can be done in this format, and all those ways of making a game are incredibly valid. If HPS didn't actually have fights, its story would still be worth experiencing, but the battle system is really obtuse, and I love it. For some, it may be the worst experience in the world though. I will admit that. It's creative and challenging, but it's also kind of like dropping the orange juice down the chute in Silent Hill 2. You and your fellow assassins use pistols, and the cowboy framing is easy to see. You're a gunslinger, and so the battle system is modeled after this context. Your MP are the bullets you have left, and so instead of, say, an ether, you get a reload. But there's only one reload in the game, so use it wisely. If you die, you get reloaded automatically though. Just retry. Nearly every special shot costs a bullet though, and you can shoot flavorless bullets for no cost, and mild damage. Every battle in the game is a puzzle. The normal JRPG resource management of special attacks versus normal attacks, or even passing on a turn are here, but each assassin has certain skills that the kinds of bullets you need to fight them with are very specific. They all have certain weaknesses and immunities, but it's not as simple as hitting someone with a fire affinity with ice. But similar to a battle anime, each opponent has a trait that means your certain doom. That is, if you don't find a way around it. But there isn't a shot that automatically wins you a battle. It's just that without it, your chances of victory on a first playthrough are basically impossible. Some enemies, without having a specific strategy, will one-shot you. Especially if you don't have any special guns, it seems on the outset impossible to get through these battles. There are 8 types of guns, all with their special type of shot, including syphilis. Syphilis! Damn. You beat my syphilis. You can only have access to 3 types of shots in battle at a time is what this means. So you never have access to your full arsenal in a fight, even if you get all the guns in the game before you fight a single opponent. Utilizing shots that will make an opponent's special shot not trigger, or make up for a stat disparity between the two of you, is the key to snatching victory here. These battles were not an afterthought. And to my delight, they aren't just simple one-way puzzle solutions either, something that you just need to memorize and get on with it. I haven't fully confirmed this, but it seems that you can win without following the strategy that the game gives you. Oh, right, forgot to mention, you can walk around and explore the nonsensical dreamscape and find intel on your opponents. They'll tell you their weaknesses. But there seems to be a way you can win without following the strategy you can find in the game. I suspect this is because there is a post-game where you can fight your fellow assassins without any story context, and can win achievements called titles if you do it with certain restrictions. Some of which are things like defeating foes in one shot, and there's even one for beating them all without equipping any special guns. Wonder how that works. Which means it's possible to beat the game completely vanilla. This excites me because it gives unexpected replayability to it, and is a sign that the battle system is not as rigid as it seems. Or maybe I just need to completely break the game to actually get those titles, I don't know. Unique JRPG battle systems tend to excite us, and from a developer perspective, it gives a great look at the possible complexity of a battle system, even with only a few gears in motion. Finding a battle system like this in a game that arguably didn't need it is rather captivating, as well as inspiring. The late Parun did a great job.
Salutations, everybody. I'm EchoByte, nice to meet you. We're more than halfway through the video, and we'd like to take this time to get a breather from the GameRex and do some housekeeping. First of all, we'd like to thank our patrons, who astonishingly have stuck with us despite our pause in content. Valued Customer, Nova System, Voidwalker System, and R2 Walker have been superstars, especially with such a tumultuous year behind us. You'll never fully know how much we appreciate you. Being part of our Patreon right now mostly means you'll get your name in videos and a special Discord role. We'd like to offer more, but at the moment we've had a lot of trouble making and releasing content, so taking on any bigger of a workload would be shooting ourselves in the foot. This took what, 3 weeks? Partially because our unmedicated ADHD makes the meticulous work this takes hard to consistently do, and partially because we've been overwhelmed by life things, as I'm sure you can understand. As disabled creators, we're luckier than most to be able to do this without the fear of destitution if we don't make bank. We want to be able to support ourselves doing this, since a day job isn't really in the cards for us. Supporting us means we can eventually release more regularly, considering we'll be medicated, and have a better quality of life. Not to mention, we'd have the flexibility to hire folks to help us with production. Right now, the support you do goes towards our bills and I won't lie, video games. Though we do put work back into our content. For example, we have 2 VTuber debuts coming up. One for me to be announced, and the other for Fantasia Byte this Valentine's Day. Hers was supposed to be last year, but we had to push it back unfortunately. Last year was kind of a cluster fudge. We can't really say we've hit the ground running this year, considering this is almost the end of the month, and we had meant this to be a small little video, and now it's over an hour long. But as long as it gets released, I think we're mostly satisfied. Even if you don't support us monetarily, we're trying our best to increase our upload output regardless. Supporting us just makes it easier. Sharing our videos and streams helps a lot too. You know, spread word of mouth. So don't feel bad that the state of the world makes it impossible for you to support creators right now. There's lots of ways to do that. Though if you can, we do appreciate it. Our Patreon and Ko-fi links are in the down there part. The future of our content's kinda weird. We have plans to continue doing videos like this, since we play so many indie games and hidden gems and can't possibly comprehensively cover them all. We've gotten review keys from a number of devs that we need to roll out content for, that we're much past due with. Being as small as we are, it's still super humbling that publishers and devs would want us to cover their stuff, or even know about us in the first place. But we hardly have time to be awestruck. So yeah, it's better to see reviews here too this year. We used to be strongly against doing reviews for artistic reasons, but the work of various peers of ours that do reviews that are definitely still video essays have made us rethink that mindset, and not be so stringent on how we name or present our videos. Though you probably shouldn't expect a numerical score from us. Finally, there's our namesake, Fluffbyte Presents, the long-form video essays we'd like to be known for. Our schedule for those has been wrecked for some time, but we're trying to use projects like this to get back used to working from start to finish, from writing to recording to editing, because we always get snagged at some point in the process. We just couldn't get back on the horse properly last year, but we have been working on stuff. Despite our best efforts, things just haven't worked out the way we wanted them to. But the next Fluffbyte Presents will go into why that's been that way. Sorry to keep you waiting, folks who've been with us for a while. And to new folks, I hope we can surprise you if you endeavor to stay. Well, I think that's most of the housekeeping. If there are any games you think should have been on this list, feel free to tell us in the comments. As long as they're not Chained Echoes or Super Animal Lesbian RPG, because we definitely have those on our radar or on our currently playing list. But anyway, thanks for sticking it out in the video this long. Enjoy the rest of the show. To be honest, I think having a unique approach to JRPG... Piss. I think having a unique approach to JRPG conventions is a through line in all the games we're highlighting here, particularly in regards to battle systems, flow of battle, or the relationship between battles and exploration. Playing with conventions is often a sign an author knows them well, or perhaps is unaware that an element is expected to be handled in a certain way. Outsider art is cool too.
Either way, it's a joy to see. Some say you need to know the rules before you can break them. Innovation's funny like that. I feel bad about my natural disinterest at Other Her Loving Embrace on first blush. If not for the cover art being so great, we might have overlooked it completely. We're not graphic snobs by any means, but there is a pixel art that grabs us and pixel art that doesn't elicit very strong emotion. Our anime-loving sensibilities probably have something to do with that, but in this game's case, it was way more to do with the fact that we tend to not have a lot of strong positive emotions for NES-style pixel art. And games with characters on a small scale. Tiny characters are why we still haven't played Terraria, and why, if not for a past partner having it have been their special interest, we might not have ever gotten into the original Risk of Rain. So when we first booted up Other, we got a little deflated at the visual approach. But it knows what it is and what it wants to be, and that won me over even more strongly. And it only took about 10 minutes. See, what one might expect, and to a degree think you're getting when you jump into this game, especially blind, is that it's an homage to old NES RPGs with a mostly static battle screen where you only see who you're fighting, as if it were a first-person perspective. You know, things like Earthbound, Mother 1. Though you do get to see a little portrait of your character when it's their turn. In the wide context of JRPGs, saying this game takes inspiration from Undertale is not uniquely profound, but for Other it feels relevant to say because it builds upon Undertale's frame for battles in a really innovative way, at least in my opinion. Magic in Other Her Loving Embrace uses minigames to simulate your casting, often asking for time button hits to go along with fluctuating meters and bars, asking you to hit a sweet spot much like your basic attacks in Undertale. But in this game, defending from and using basic attacks is where the battle system truly shines. Like Undertale, Other is a hybrid of sorts, but instead of a JRPG that's in part a bullet hell, Other is in part a 2D platforming hybrid with sensibilities from Smash Brothers? It's a sight to behold, but playing it is so captivating. It bleeds the feeling of a system that's easy to learn and hard to master. This is another challenging game. Unlike most JRPGs, you can't always predict how much damage an attack towards you will do. If you play well enough, your enemy won't be able to hit you at all. When you and the monsters are exchanging blows, you get a few seconds in platform brawler mode during your attacks where enemies try to evade you by jumping, dodging, or absconding to a higher vantage point, but don't actually try to hit you. It feels almost like playing tag. The enemy gets to attack you after any of your actions, be it attempting to run away, using an item, or casting buffs. And when they do, you get another platform brawler battle screen. But in this one, it's impossible for you to attack them, forcing you to be on the defensive, and having to dodge just like they did. This is where the game most resembles Undertale, or even WarioWare, in that you get a minigame-like scenario constantly to dodge attacks, and the attacks are themed like the things that you're fighting. If, for instance, you're fighting some frogs, you'll have to dodge them spitting their tongues at you. There's even a skeleton enemy where their attack is literally a minigame that's a reference to the Sans fight in Undertale. It's fucking great. This battle system makes the stakes higher for every battle but rewards you for knowing your enemy well. In line with 2D action platformers like Mega Man, you're rewarded for learning enemy attack patterns. Your current level has less to do with how hard or easy the game is, and more about how well you know who you're fighting. The difficulty of fights is determined by your proficiency at evading and attacking your opponent, but casting magic will help mitigate enemy attacks, and yours, if you kinda suck at it, making the game playable for those who aren't very dexterous, and just giving you that much more of an extra edge if, for instance, you're a Smash Brothers champion. It is still RPG after all, so you can't ignore those elements. It's not for everyone, but the genre intersection is quite awesome, especially for folks who find basic turn-based battles understimulating. This game is incredibly stimulating. The other indie game comparison I would have to make to Other would have to be Crosscode. Like Crosscode, Other has equally prioritized its puzzles with its action sequences. A dungeon is a good mix of combat and puzzles. Sometimes I found myself spending more time on the puzzles than in the battles, and that's a good feeling. The variation of engagements kept it fresh, and it's ludonarratively resonant as well. The powers of the main character aren't just reserved for battles, but are needed for puzzle solutions as well. And when you unlock a new power through story progress, you don't only get a new skill for battle, but also a new way to interact with the world, or traverse it. The story follows a young boy named Gershram as he starts to master his mysterious magic powers in order to help his small town deal with an ever-growing evil spirit problem. You only get 2 party members, Gershram and a wizard, who seems to have taken a great interest in his abilities, being a mentor-like figure to him. The wizard is less than the ideal mentor figure though, as his relationship with the young ward is fairly reminiscent of Mob and Regan from Mob Psycho 100. But it's also kind of hitting me in my heartstrings because of that as well. Gershram is good-natured, optimistic, and thinks the best of the wizard, despite him being characterized as maybe someone who doesn't deserve that trust. That coupled with Gershram's power of bubbles and defense makes it hard not to compare him to Steven Universe. Some might find that less than great, but it sets a tone for the game that allows other, or at least its demo, to be able to pull itself out of its darker moments. And fuck it, no shade to Heisei Pistol Show or The World Ends With You or Yik. Okay, it may be a little shade to Yik, but I like having a protagonist that's, you know, a nice person. I know it's rocking the boat, I know. There's only a demo out at the moment for Other Her Loving Embrace, but it is one of the most promising games we're waiting for this year. And that also means that it's hard to spoil. I highly recommend checking this one out for its innovative approach and really satisfying battle system. The demo in particular ends with an additional wrinkle to the battle system that I will not spoil because you deserve to see it for yourself. I think it's funny how easily one can pass up on great art because of judging a book by its cover. I wasn't into Other Her Loving Embrace's style, but we also don't have nostalgia for NES style graphics in particular. So it wasn't a thing about hating it, it was just neutral. The general simplicity of the game's visuals are not a weak point though. I think the graphics and the size of the characters make the game's high ambitions a lot easier to achieve since the sprites aren't terribly complex. They don't need different sprites for the characters in battle and running around the world, so that probably cuts down a lot on sprite animations. Otherwise, they would probably go something like the Final Fantasy VII route and have detailed sprites for, say, battle and simplified sprites for running around, but it's also nice to keep a consistent style. But there are a lot of ways to have clear and appealing presentation without necessarily being hyper detailed. The character portraits, reminiscent of Western animation, are really good and show plenty of detailed and sometimes hilarious expressions to complement the dialogue. And the sprite work in general is really good, especially during the more dramatic moments. Hell, the shopkeeper in the title screen alone showed that this game has an ability to knock your socks off with its art. The character portrait thing may seem small and inconsequential, but people connect with other people and with characters better when they can see a face and make out expressions, even simple ones. And in a JRPG, there tends to be a lot of dialogue and a lot of chances to emote. Hell, getting to know and loving characters is part of the reason it's kinda hard to put down any JRPG worth its salt, right? And as a VTuber, we know all too well that any face is better than no face at all. It's a strange sensation to be highlighting the games we chose for this video in particular because this is our first game recommendation video and we had 2 other ones that didn't pan out. Those videos will have highlighted games that, while still indie, are a lot more conventional than what we showed today. That isn't a good or a bad thing, but I think it's a consequence of us going down a rabbit hole even further than we thought possible. We love playing strange, unique games, and we discover more of them all the time, but we don't tend to have the time to play them all to completion. And we're learning that if we aim to beat every game we want to cover, uploads will continue to be slow as heck. Given our long breaks between videos last year, it's enticing to just do anything we can to upload more, including covering things that will give us more attention regardless of if we cover it well. But our autism and our ADHD means that at times we have intense focus on only a few things at once, and there's no way to predict what we'll feel excited about talking about at any given time. And right now, we are waist deep in stuff that's super obscure, even to other indie lovers. We want to make what we want to make, but that damn algorithm always threatens to twist our arm. This video is an exercise in going up against what will get us clicks. There's less niche stuff we want to cover that's much more in popular culture right now, and oftentimes we want to make videos on stuff that is incidentally on people's minds. This time though, our special interest has led us to following the most obscure shit we've ever covered. And I'm wondering how we got here, cause we weren't always this much of a gaming hipster. For most of our gaming life, we've been a console gamer, and the indie games we used to have access to were the most popular ones around because of it, especially before the Switch came out. Then we got access to a computer that we could play some games on and look for indies that we always wanted to try out. Things that are now indie darlings, ironically enough, and have their own console releases out. Stuff like Doki Doki Literature Club and One Shot. Stuff that, if things stayed the same, we'd eventually have been able to play even if we stayed on console. Once we got our own computer that was meant for gaming and streaming and editing, we slowly started ravaging all the nooks and crannies we could find obscure games in. Not just stuff that lacked visibility, but also stuff that wasn't trying to draw attention to itself. Many have become games we cherish, even if we're finding a game on itch.io and not Game Jolt or RPG Maker forums. We still often run into games that are buried by the sheer oversaturation of the indie game space, or maybe even a developer not knowing how to market themselves. Some of the stuff on this list we found from scrolling through hundreds of games. Others were recommended or just we became aware of through chance. But what they all have in common is that we'd have found them even if we kept to the relatively expected bubble we spent most of our gaming journey in. Anseal Disc 1 is atypical for us because it replicates a visual style and era of gaming we didn't spend much time in growing up, so there isn't a nostalgia factor for games that look like that for us. Though weirdly, I wish we did have that nostalgia, because it was a good era. We learned from other games on this list that a great game can be packaged in a style that doesn't immediately make your panties drop, and that's okay too. Not everything has to be catered to you on every level, right? We're learning to resist only engaging in games that win us over at first glance. Anseal draws inspiration from handheld RPGs of the Game Boy Color era. We looked up games of that ilk to get a better idea of what the major inspiration from that era would have been, but nothing we saw besides Pokemon seemed to fit, and that comparison only goes so far. This isn't a monster taming game. It's a fairly straightforward JRPG in many regards. It tells the story of Ali, a young girl with a magical destiny tied to a cursed sword that chose her and which hurts her to not have by her side. Her and her newfound friends with backgrounds worthy of being protagonists in their own right are fighting to uncover the secrets of a foul organization that has dystopic influence over their city. It's a coming-of-age story with a 3-member party system and prides itself on party synergy and customization. Instead of having a big cast, the game features a small cast that can be insanely customized. It was only after I started playing it that I noticed that the dev described the sequel as a deck builder. Sorry, spoilers for a game that has Disc 1 in its title. But I'm pretty sure the first one applies as a deck builder as well, since your party can only have access to 8 skills at a time, and you learn dozens over the course of the game. During only 4 hours, I think my main character had at least 20. You have a tremendous amount of freedom on how you want to develop and use your party. There are still roles for your characters to generally fill, so if you like a little more structure, the game does have moves that are probably more a suggested loadout. The most interesting character mechanically will have to be Ali, who is a magic tank. Her primary ability being that she can redirect magical attacks to herself to protect party members. When she does this, she takes half damage and has a chance to permanently add the spell she just got hit with to her skill tree. Despite being a sword user, Ali is an unconventional main character combat-wise, and is supported by Sai, a frail magic user who also fills in a monk role and has access to many melee attacks he can flavor with elemental damage. The team is rounded out by Amara, a girl who can't properly use magic besides summoning weapons like some preteen Noctis. The interplay of these characters is really dynamic both story-wise and combat-wise. The 3 kids are comrades more through necessity than kindness, which is something I'm not used to seeing in games with characters so young. It would have been so easy to make all of them childhood friends to get the player to accept their chemistry without question. But luckily, this game's writing is doing a lot more heavy lifting than, say, Final Fantasy 15. Damn, that was mean. That was mean, I might not include that one. But my brain went immediately to that. They aren't super close at first, and don't even outright trust each other more than they have to. Growing through reluctant trust and trauma bonding feels deeply resonant for a coming-of-age story. It works really well here. And of course, like many JRPGs before it, Ezreal juggles a lighthearted tone and more serious themes like self-perception, human atrocities, misgendering, and the troubles of riding the bus. The game has inspirations beside games that were for the Game Boy though. For instance, it has team attacks kinda like Chrono Trigger and enemy skill acquiring that kinda reminds me of several Final Fantasy games. Ezreal is an urban fantasy with a tight focus. There doesn't seem to be side quests as far as I had gotten in the game, but there are plenty of missable story relevant scenes and skills. When I first picked it up, I didn't know that there was a Steam release, which revealed to me through achievements some of the optional content. And I have to say, it's pretty poggers, though I wouldn't look at the achievements if I were you, unless you don't care about spoilers. The fact that this game is called Disc 1 is a nod to old games, especially RPGs like Final Fantasy or Parasite Eve, which is funny because as far as we know, there were no multi-cart handheld games, so it's a nice nod to its wider inspirations as well. The disc numbering also serves as a way to say that there's more story to come, which is really exciting. Disc 2 doesn't have any release date at this time, but its shifting characters makes me equally excited and worried for what to expect at the end of Disc 1. That's it! We did it! That's the whole thing! That's all we wrote. We'll probably write like we'll probably improv an epilogue after. An epilogue. Something to round it out. At some point we are gonna mention how we are aware of Super Animal Lesbian RPG, Sea of Stars, and Chain Echoes, and we weren't trying to slight those games by not mentioning them. And don't forget to come to my VTuber debut on Twitch on Valentine's Day 2023. See you there.